Hello, we want to talk about the missing link. Forgive our handwriting. In structural dissociation. And we are the Chris's. Now, the way we understand structural dissociation is, firstly, it's predicated on a developmental theory, or how can I say this? Structural dissociation is its own thing. First used to describe PTSD, but has been more recently kind of married to another developmental theory that everybody has separate self states as when they're born, and that it takes years for those self states to eventually, quote unquote, naturally, we'll question that in a moment, to merge into a singular person. And even then, that's kind of wiggly in all kinds of ways. But let's say we are assuming that that theory is correct. So you have, say, a person born 0. That's 0 years old. And we'll make some lines. Let's say they're every 2 years because I'm going to run out of room. So you got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and we'll put a 12. Okay. And here's a timeline for you. And no, maybe that's not a good idea. We won't do a timeline so that I have plenty of room to do what I'm doing. I am going to use different colors to denote different self states. Hunger. Oh, here's hunger. Oh, that's barely visible. I don't like that. Okay, let me try that again. I'll make a nice big thick line. There. Okay. Here we go. The baby is born, and here is hunger. And we'll make 1 or 2 more. We will make an attachment line. Attachment to my caregivers. And we'll make 1 more. Get another good color. And I'm trying to think of pain. We'll just do pain. Because we know that that's something that pain, discomfort of a pain kind of sort. Okay. Notably, we're still really not... Let me go back to white and a smaller dot here. We're really not fully singular here. Okay, but certainly getting there. So what happens is, as a child is developing, these things are completely separate in the very early years, right? Nice big gap. They're completely separate. This has been shown in some experiments. Some part of my brain wants to say Carl Rogers, but no. But anyway, whatever, it doesn't matter. So these states are completely separate, and sometime between 5 to 9, they start to get closer and closer to each other. And sometime between something like 7 and 11, they kind of merge. You can kind of see here on this example, they're getting together here. So, in this graph, there's a theory that if during one of these vulnerable phases, usually they're talking about probably around here. no later. Some say no later than 7 to 9, but I'm fudging here for developmental delays, whatever. So somewhere in this area, if there is a trauma, that these lines will not merge the way they supposedly ought to. They consider this merge to be what will happen if you leave somebody alone and give them the things they need. They consider this to be the way things will happen naturally. If nature is left to its own devices, this will happen. I have some arguments with that. That's part of what this video is about. Like, huh? As to like why this happens and whether or not that's considered natural or not. But the other question is, what happens when the trauma is here or even earlier? It can be gestational trauma, so it can happen during the 9 months that you're in the womb. And it could be intergenerational trauma, in which case, then that's its own thing. But there is a certain amount of potential for inheriting trauma that your parents and grandparents and so on went through. So that's on like a metabolic DNA activation kind of level. We will set that aside for smarter minds than mine and much more knowledgeable minds than mine to try and figure that one out. But there is the 9 months that we are in the womb, and however much of that we might be aware of or impacted by the trauma that is experienced or directly experienced by us while in the womb. So there's this phase here where presumably these self states exist at some point before 0. So what about this phase? What if happens if the trauma is here, when these are not even anywhere near each other, when they are completely and totally separate? So that's number 1. What if there's other reasons that these guys never mesh? What if this is not the natural state of things? What if naturally they could remain completely separate and not actually start to merge? What if they all developed separately? So this is our supposition here. You can imagine we're doing more or less the same thing here. Find myself a good dot, and there we go. Now they're developing in parallel. I remember what colors I used. Okay. So this is the supposition that somebody just grows up parallel, plural, in parallel. So these are different folk. This is, headmate A, headmate B, and headmate C. What did I say they were? This one was pain. We had hunger. And then we had, like, love, attachment. What if they developed into, eventually, okay, you gotta imagine those other lines, right? We got our ages here. Right? So what if this one, somewhere around here, started developing their own sense of love and attachment, their own ways of dealing with pain? What if this one learned how to deal with needs and hunger, or deal with their own pain, and so on? And, eventually these things would, like, get thicker, They'd eventually develop into basically looking an awful lot like the other last chart did once they entered adolescence. This is my theory, that maybe in some cases, they never mesh within the whole body, that they actually remain separate, whether or not it was because of trauma. Now, why would people mesh? Why would people fuse? Why would they merge in that other chart? Due to environmental issues. So, for example, if a child has an imaginary, quote unquote, imaginary playmate. So, let us take this chart and take this example just for a moment. So, this is, the kid, let's just say, and this is the imaginary playmate, IP, and maybe, I don't know, maybe they got another one. They got a couple of imaginary playmates. Maybe this one's quiet so far. Hasn't fully developed those other lines yet. But this one in the middle, call it Hannah. And Jade. Trying to find some gender neutral-ish names. Okay. So Jade has an imaginary playmate named Hannah. Completely, totally a headmate, but pictures them outside of their body, has conversations with them, maybe does things because their friend tells them to, and so on. What do the parents usually do? They usually tell the kid eventually, maybe they humor it for a while, but eventually they usually tell the kid that this isn't acceptable. However it is that they say it. They may say you're too old for this now. They may, punish the kid for having done things that the headmate told them to do. Whatever it is, they discourage this on some level. And maybe there's other social cues and so on, pressure to merge these three things. There's more than three, but in our oversimplification, to try and make this digestible, we're just saying there's three. But maybe there's a point where that pressure, we're going to put the exertion of pressure, a big mighty hand, ends up pushing this into this, and they start to consolidate due to external pressure. Not every family does the same, coercion and threatening and punishment and discouraging and so on. So not every kid would end up with this external pressure for their stuff to get all tied together. And external pressure could be anything. It could be early potty training. It could be, I don't know, like going to school. I mean, there may be so many, like, quote unquote, normal or ubiquitous things in our culture that could cause the merging of these different self states. The important thing to note is they don't have proof. So, the theorists don't have any proof of why or even whether those self states merge. They have theories, but they can't prove them. The only way to prove these theories would be to take a baby, or take more than one baby, and put them through certain environments with certain behaviors from their caregivers, and test out behavior and see how they come out at the end. And that would be unethical, because in certain circumstances they would have to mistreat the child and so on, and you can't do that. So they have no way to prove anything. But the reason I come to this conclusion is, firstly, from people who are traumatized. Okay, we know the trauma can happen anytime, and like we described before, it can happen before birth. So we know that there may be circumstances under which those kids would never have that quote-unquote natural merging. So we have that one group. But we also have another similar group of adults who say they were never traumatized, who believe they grew up in parallel, like this, like what we were just describing, where Jade and Hannah may never have merged. These white lines never happened. That they grew up in parallel. They never merged. They didn't come together and then come apart again. And that would account for the endogenic folk who believe they've never had trauma, or who believe they were plural before they had trauma. Yeah. One second. So we're going to go back to this one. Just for a moment, back to this first slide. Because I want to describe what I was just talking about. Wonder if I have to draw it all over again, but let us try. Let us see what we can do. Okay. Getting my eraser. What if this never happened? Or a bunch of other, different circumstances. But what if we are at the age of 6? This person does experience trauma. They have not yet come together. That's the developmental phase they're at. They're not yet merged. They have trauma now. They know they didn't have any trauma before that. This was their first experience of trauma. This is one endogenic case that we're considering. They have always been plural before. You can see it here. 3 different self states, right? At an age 6 level of development. That's pretty far along in terms of cognitive and behavioral development, but there's still 3 different states. They're not yet merged. They're maybe getting a little closer together, but they don't really have a sense of being one yet, is basically what I'm getting down to there. Is they can tell they're not 1, they're 3. They have enough introspection to notice that. Trauma happens. Okay, now let me get my colors here. They stay separate. That's one case. That's when the endogenic person does have trauma, but is absolutely positive. They are 100% entitled to their being positive. I have never lived in their body. I don't know what they went through. They lived in their body. They know how good their memory is. They know whether or not they were playing together as a kid or whatever, if they labeled each other with names or whatever it is they know about each other, they know about each other. I have no business doubting them. They had their trauma. They were already previously plural. Now, note, that's not terribly different than, I'm going to use green just to describe another plural system. Here's another person. Actually, you know what? I'll put a line. Underneath the line, I'm putting somebody else. Same colors, but different person. I'm going to make the lines a little thinner just so I have room. But this person had trauma at the same age. Right? But they were closer. And they would have been like that, except pain was starting to get really close, and trauma split off. So this is where you end up with the ANP and the EP of classic structural dissociation, which is shown in charts in a different way than this, but I wanted to show it from a developmental point of view. So here you can see the same age of impact, they already had a strong sense of becoming one person, where this other person did not. They have a strong sense of still being separate. Same age, maybe even similar trauma, but 2 different experiences. So to this one, they are all people who grew up in parallel. And to this one, it's a split. They have a sense of having come together. They were one, but they split. So now they have a sense of longing to get back to that oneness. They know what it felt like to be here, and now they want to get back. They want that sense of oneness. They don't want to be six again necessarily, but they want that sense of merging into one. Whatever it was they were here, they miss, and they want to get back to it. So these people are like, I've never been one person. The people on top here, I've never been one person. It's always been many of us. Why would I ever want to become something I never was? And as far as I can tell, was never meant to be. Where the person down here on the bottom has this sense of longing and wanting to be one again. And I think we're going to show this again in a different way, but I think this may account for different experiences in the community. And this can happen, at any point along this. All right. Anywhere in the, 3 to 4 year old, all the way up to like 10, 11, 12-year-old ish, depending on that person's individual sense of self, their own experiences. The initial, quote unquote, initial trauma could have happened anywhere in here, and they would still have this experience. There's a lot of other things. Somebody in here is bringing up another possibility, which would account for the even younger phase, which might be worth going into. So I'm going to make another slide. Fun. So what we're thinking right now, all right, we have to set ourselves up because we need a whole new slide for this. Let's zoom in on that age group. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is the -9 months, right? So you're 9 months. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, something like that. This would be the case for us. We have gestational trauma. So we have our, let me find some dot size that works. Here we go. We have our different states. Think about this before I do it. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's like such a beginning thought here. We're like, okay. Here we are. We've got 3 of our self states. We had traumatic impact really early. I mean, okay. Firstly, this is inaccurate. We're not going to have these self states that early. They won't be at 9 months. But whatever. Just like bear with me. Somewhere in here, you start having like feelings. You start having emotional states. You wouldn't have hunger yet until, after being born. In fact, that might be valid. Thank you. Haha, thank you. All right, thank you, headmate. Okay, we wouldn't have hunger yet until we're born. We wouldn't really have emotional attachment. We have other emotions, so there would be other lines. But we definitely have pain, okay? Trauma in the womb. Okay, we can explain this one pretty fairly easily. We have EDS. So we don't even have to blame the other things happening in our life, which would have impacted some of these things. We have EDS. That's pain. It is a collagen disorder. Joints get dislocated or subluxated, like slightly out of joint, and it hurts. So even in the womb, even just tossing and turning in the womb, or the person who provided us a nest to grow in, laying down, sitting up, moving, could cause us pain. So we have pain before we're even breathing air. This is, aside from the massive amount of pain that probably happened when we were born. So we're already anxious. This is on top of the anxiety floods that we're getting because they were being tormented while we were in the womb. So for all kinds of reasons, we have whatever level of pain, anxiety, whatever happening here. So we figure we're born ready for trouble. And indeed, when we were born, there's trouble too. So there's other stuff that happened when we were born. So we had no reason. These were already delineated pretty strongly, and no reason for them to ever come together. It just wouldn't happen. We were compartmentalizing things from the very start, very deliberately. That's our best guess. So these are very strongly delineated different things. So as each of these states is maturing in parallel, each of them fronting at different times, they develop their own different ways of coping the world. Somewhere around, I don't know, actually this one's probably quite early on. I mean, hunger and pain, right? They go together. Hunger and pain, and then whatever. They all like develop into their own multicolored, multifaceted things as soon as they can or do for whatever reason. They all become their own diverse people. Meanwhile, back at the farm, in our life, we have other additional impacts somewhere around here. Call that T for trauma. There's more trauma around somewhere around 1.5 years old, because we've got to split a baby in here. It's about that age. We have another one that's about 6 months. So as best we can figure, we have 2 impacts there. We had twins who were 4. So somewhere around there. I think we have one that's about 3 to 5, but I think the impact started around 3. We have all of these different trauma points that people split off. So where did they split off from? Well, they didn't split off from anything that was coming together to be one person. They split off in their own directions, and separated even more, or this one maybe created its own, separate lines. Over here became twins, so there was like a diversion into 2 parallel lines that stayed close together. They worked in concert with each other, and so on. So we were never, as far as we could tell, ever destined to be one person. Not on this trajectory. Not since, we had so much physical pain. Not since we were traumatized at such a young age. Not since somebody was doing things they shouldn't be doing and recording it. Not since this other thing happened. It's like, no. Like, this was never gonna be a singular person. And so we consider ourselves like, I mean, what do we call ourselves? It's like born plural, yes. Traumatized, yes. So we say, well, both and? Because we never ended up with that coming close together and then breaking apart again that some people have, where they have that feeling that their core or their original or that they want to become one again, that again part comes from that almost having come together part and then splitting off again. We don't have that. That didn't happen to us. So, back to structural dissociation before this becomes too long. And what this looks like. So, we're going to zoom in on tertiary for a moment. Get myself a smaller dot. And all right, so we've got tertiary. Let me see if I can even spell it. I don't know, something like that. Tertiary structural dissociation is supposedly, I'm going to draw them big, I'm going to draw them smaller. So you got like your big ANPs and you got your EPs. So the fact that there's more than one ANP would say this could be DID because there's more than one ANP. And we're not even sure, really, because I think they're missing something. And this could be some people with a DID. Obviously, I mean, there's more than one apparently normal part and lots of emotional parts. So these would be the stuck, lost folk. These would be your co-conscious crew. In theory. And at one point, all of this could have been one thing, but they all popped out due to trauma, as shown in other videos. Let us go on to what we think is happening for folk more like us. So, I'm going to use another color somewhere in here. I'm going to draw it bigger just to zoom in, not because it's bigger, better, or anything like that. I'm going to call it quaternary. Yeah. Quaternary structural dissociation. And we're going to use, we'll use yellow. Okay. So I think, and don't, does not mean I'm right, but I think what's happening for some people where their headmates grew up in parallel, for example, is that these are subsystems or people within the system. So note, although I'm very sloppy and I made those overlap, but I'm not sure it matters. They could overlap, so it doesn't matter. And we have ANPs. And hey, let's make even a subsystem. Why? Because we can. And we have ANPs. And we have EPs. Okay. So, I think what's happening for some of us is that we as a whole contain quote-unquote full people. I like the word people. That within my system there are these people that we have our own ANP. And within we have all of these separate EPs. These little, let me zoom. I don't even have enough room to write an E in some of them. But these EPs. Because I think we grew up parallel to each other, forming, I want to call it a full personality, but personality is a full identity of our own. We have a different belief system from each other. We have different physiological experiences from each other. Like basically everything that makes a person a person. So, to give an example, Buck was what would have been called an EP. Okay. But what really happened was he was triggered, and I will draw it a little bit. So his EP was really big, and his ANP within himself was suppressed. He was usually showing up as his emotional self, and not really showing up as his more buttoned up, put together self. But once he resolved some of his own trauma, the EP got smaller, and his ANP was able to reassert itself more and get stronger. He still does have EPs in and of himself. They're not EPs for the whole system. They are Buck's emotional issues that can take him over. And he can be in the back when they take over and be ranting and raving in the back of our head. Or he can be fronting and his EP confront. But although I will feel him if he gets triggered, and I'll be able to hear him, and he may have passive influence over me if I'm fronting, it's different than if it was my EP that took over, if that makes sense. Like it would have full reign and full front and not passive influence. So I believe that one of the differences is that I have a full sense of myself as if I'm a singular person within this body, and I have PTSD. So 90% of the time, for me or more, my ANP is in control, and there's the possibility of one of my EPs taking over if I get triggered. I may have a flashback. I may have emotional dysregulation. I might have insomnia. If I switch with Buck, the triggers are different. The emotionality is different. The flashbacks are different. Like everything is different if Buck is fronting. So it's like we are our own people capsules within the whole system. And over here, we are describing a fully separated, delineated subsystem with its own separate, delineated people within it, which is not really, I mean, this isn't like a great diagram, firstly. It's not really how we're structured. So, we're describing different issues. So sometimes people have these, what do they call it? Side systems? Or sibling systems within their I'm sorry. We're pointing to the wrong thing. They may have one or more subsystems within their outer system, the whole system. They may have separate inner subsystems. And these would be people, these big circles, would be people within the outer layer of the system, where this is a subsystem within the outer layer of the system. But there can also be subsystems. So each of these, let me get another color, each of these could be a subsystem within a subsystem. Anyway, I think once we get to either polyfragmented systems or those systems that have that very strong sense of being individual people, not parts, I think we're in this territory, this quaternary territory, where, let me come back out here, where I think when we have tertiary systems, they have more of a feeling of all being a part of a whole. So they have a few ANPs, 8, 10, 20, and they have EPs, all their trauma holders and so on in their system, but they don't have as strong of a internal boundary between them. See, they're directly in contact with each other within the outer system. They don't have as much a sense of peopleness, if that makes sense. Anyway, the purpose of this video mostly is one more quick point. We'll make one more slide. So, our main point, aside from understanding these things, so you can have a plural system where your EPs are parts, right? Is a part that when you're going to rescue it, it's possible it will not become a person. It will remain a part and not become an ANP. It will, or it will merge with some ANP or with other EPs. So, you might end up with something like this. So you might rescue EPs and then they become a whole new ANP. Several EPs form into an ANP in this case. Where what's happened for us over and over again is what we described with Buck. So we've got a person within our system. Their ANP is not as big or forceful or front as this enormous EP. They've got several others. They've got their ANP, and what happens is when we take care of the trauma and they come to the here and now, then this happens. Their ANP gets reinforced. Almost as if, it blends into like some of the EPs may go merge into the ANP. The ANP gets bigger and reinforced. The former EP may be resolved or merge into their former ANP, reinforcing it. Maybe even a couple of them do. So they have less of them. The EPs take over less often. And they find that they're not looping and stuck anymore. Now they have a fully blossoming personhood. Like they discover or remember who they are, and become more solid, more delineated, more them. And so, as an example, he would constantly be debunking things in our own head. So he'd be talking down headmates, he'd be logistically fighting anything that we were thinking. When we resolved the problem, it didn't make him any less cynical. He spent about 10 of his own years, but he went from 4 to 14. He spent a long time in this like in-between state, maybe with the EP and the ANP kind of fighting with each other, where he was more a passenger in our system, and he was a rebel, and he was angry a lot, but he was also partially co-aware, and he couldn't fully participate. He was like in this half state. He wasn't fully taken over by his EP anymore, but he was struggling. And then he grew up another 10 years. He matured. That EP shrunk or got redirected. He's like, I don't know about that, but yeah. So his ANP grew, whether or not his EP shrunk. He now has, like, he doesn't get taken over as much with the irrationality, although he's very emotional. See, he owns the emotion more. That emotional part is now kind of subsumed into his ANP, and it's a part of his identity. And he has more self-control. He's more in the now. He has interest. He likes certain types of music. He has like romantic interests. He has like all these other things. More of a fully blossomed personality. He has familial ties in here. For a little while, he adopted one of the kids in the system. It's like he has things to do, agendas. He writes angry letters to Congress people. It's like he is now a person. He can sign his own letters, etc. He doesn't want to become anybody else in here. He loves being himself. So, anyway, that's kind of how we Chris's are. When we find what they would call an EP and think of as a stuck lost part, it's really to us a stuck lost person. And because they're busy looping in PTSD land, we don't get the experience of them as a full person. Just like if a veteran is freaking out, having flashbacks, and screaming fire in a hole, you'll never know that he plays bass in a rock band and I don't know, and like likes to collect coins or something. I mean, he wouldn't know what his religion is. He's too busy screaming fire in the hole and jumping behind cars because he's afraid of like incoming fire. And you know what I mean? It's like you won't experience the full person when they're in that state. That doesn't make them any less of a person. They're in a state at the moment. So our headmates get stuck in that state. Now, folk who might be in that tertiary thing, or folk who have a very strong sense of, I was once one person and I want to get back to that, you'll have to tell me if I'm right or wrong. I have heard from some people that I'm kind of on the right track with some of this. People who would know, and I'm not sure if I'm on the right track, but I know that this would be one way of explaining one of the many divides in the community where some people absolutely insist they're all parts of one person, which is really a therapy line, like comes from singular people that say that. So is it true or not? I don't know. Versus what some people in the community say is, no, we're all people in here. We are all completely separate people. As people with separate bodies. We are people. And, we have different religions. We have different tastes in things. We have different physiological responses. We have different likes and loves in music and art and handwriting and all the things that make a person we have. So we'll stop ranting, but I want to know whether or not this is at all helpful to anybody as to why there might be some differences of opinion on how we experience ourselves. This isn't to say there should be any differences in how we're treated, but I'm curious whether this might explain some of those differences in how we self-describe and I guess our goals. Some people really want to go back to being one. Some plurals really want to go back to being one person, whereas many of us can't even conceive of the possibility of being one person and or have absolutely no desire to become one person. And often those two go hand in hand because we've never experienced it. We don't want to go, quote unquote, back to it because we never were. You know, it would be becoming a completely different person, where other people have this sense of, but we were almost there. We were one person once, and we want to get back to that. And that's, I'm not saying it's invalid. I'm saying that that could be entirely valid, that both can be valid. Like, why not both? Yeah, so let us know what you think, and hopefully this helps people understand a little bit more about the stuck lost differences, like how that could look. Do you come out of being stuck and lost and merge in with somebody else to become, quote unquote, more whole? Or do you, like, kind of unfold or reveal more of yourself that was being suppressed? And which is it? And it could be different for different people. Different plurals can have different experiences. And this might be some of why. And that's it.